Good morning. Thank you for being here, and please excuse us for this small delay. So I would like to start welcoming you all to the International Conference Political Atlas 20th Century, Atlas being an acronym for Agency, Transfers, Links, Latin America, Southern Europe. Indeed, the aim of this conference is to pinpoint and to analyze the links, both political and cultural, connecting Southern Europe to Latin America during the 20th century, and to see how agency, ideas, and practices circulate between Southern Europe and Latin America during the 20th century, as I've just said. So with a couple of exceptions, this conference will take place in English in order for non-French or non-Spanish speaking audience to be able to understand the presentations, but most of us are accustomed to speaking and to communicating in French and in Spanish, so part of the debate might also take place in one of these two languages. Before addressing the topic announced in the title of my intervention, I would like to warmly thank the persons and institutions which made this conference possible. First of all, I would like to thank the École Française d'Athènes and its director, Alexandre Farnoux, for hosting and materially supporting the organization of this conference. My warmest thanks goes to the director of the Modernist section, Tassos Anastasiadis, who unfortunately would not be with us today, but whose support for this conference was decisive. It could not have taken place if Mr. Anastasiadis would not have supported. A special thanks goes to Assistant Director Sofia Zumboulaki. Υπάρχει πρόβλημα τον ήχο? Okay. Sofia Zumboulaki, whose contribution and efficiency were key to the successful organizing of this conference. Thanks also to Mrs. Platanitou, who was able to keep up with our complicated schedule, and to Lowen Gramillier for designing the poster and the program. Regarding the designing of the poster, excuse me, I would also like to thank the visual artist Stefania Struza for designing the logo of our conference, poster, and research group. Allow me also to thank the discussants, Francesca Canale from the University of Campania, Polymeris Voglis of the University of Thessaly, and Kostis Karpousilos, Director of the Contemporary Social History Archives, whose role will be key in the discussions that will follow each panel, more generally in this conference. I would like to sincerely thank all the participants to this conference for having traveled from far away in order to come and present their research in Greece for the first time for most of them. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. So allow me just to name the institutions that the participants are affiliated to, that I have not already named, and which are materially have supported the organization of this international meeting. University of Santiago de Compostela, Université Paris-Est Marne-la-Vallée, Pontificia Universidad Católica in Chile, Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez also in Chile, Centre de Philosophie Juridique et Politique of the University of Cergy-Pontoise, the Tel Aviv University, the CRIA Association in Argentina, the University of Bergamo, and the University, of course, of Nápoles, L'Orientale in Italy. Last but not least, I would like to thank you all for being here today. Without further delay, I will now present the historiographical challenges that this conference wishes to address, and following these introductory and historiographical remarks, I will present the conference's structure and rationale. Since the 1990s, global history and its two adjacent historiographical approaches, transnational and entangled history, have made crucial contributions to contemporary historiography. They have questioned Western-centered and nation-centered visions, and they have put emphasis on the links tying different geographical and cultural areas together. However, the global history approach to the 20th century has mostly focused on themes and fields related with either social or cultural history, paying little attention to the political field. In this sense, political sociology and political science have offered a solid theoretical basis for approaching political objects from a transnational perspective. So I mentioned here some examples in French political science debate on 20th century transnational history, but of course there are many more, and also in English. Still, the majority of the transnational approaches on 20th century politics have taken a very limited interest in regions other than the Western Europe or the United States. As for circulations of ideas and agency, there are still only a few studies that focus on 20th century South-South circulations or that propose a more complex geography, not only focused on the northern part of Europe and of the American continent. Moreover, global history that examines the 20th century has tended to almost exclusively focus on international institutions and has abandoned nation states or non-institutionalized agency. So this conference, even though it is fully aligned with global history's call for breaking away from nation-centered and solely Western-centered approaches, also aims to give attention to certain relevant aspects that global history focused on the 20th century has tended to overlook. Let me try and summarize what, in my sense, will be some of the main contributions of this conference with regards to the most common approaches to global history. The first point I would like to stress is the focus on two geographical areas, Latin America and Southern Europe, that 20th century global history has tended either to overlook or to analyze in terms of passive or second-class actors. The focus here on these two regions will be on these two regions, but not not only as separate case studies, but also as regions connected to each other. So we will be exploring South circulations through the case studies of connections between Latin America and Southern Europe. The second important point is our strong focus on political history and political ideas, practices, and agency. Furthermore, we will propose here not only an examination of a unique political milieu, instead we will try to elaborate a parallel cross-analysis of the circulation of right-wing, center, and left-wing agency and ideologies between Southern Europe and Latin America. This comparative and at the same time cross-cutting approach does not seek to deny the profound differences that separate the aforementioned political sensibilities. In other words, we will not be defending here the thesis of the extremes meet les extrêmes se touchent. Instead, we wish to acknowledge that part of the political practices and ideas that circulate do not stay isolated in one ideological milieu, and that often they affect other ideologies which respond positively or negatively to what their opponents say or think. In other words, our aim is to uncover unknown geographical and political, positive or negative interactions, which will remain hidden as long as we classify and isolate historical actors depending on their so-official brands or ideological stances. The third point I wish to highlight is our approach to agency. As opposed to most global history approaches, we will not pay only special attention to international organizations, for instance the United Nations, but also to nation states and non-institutionalized agency, militancy, clandestine networks, intellectuals, but also military, artists, scientists. Indeed, an initial review of the political connections between Latin America and Southern Europe suggests that both states and non-institutionalized actors played a key role in establishing the connections between the two regions. This brings me to my last point in this first part, that is, in my view, one of the main contributions of this conference. Despite our main focus on political history, political agency, and ideas, we argue for an approach to political history which puts in the center the contributions of cultural and social history. To sum up, before moving on to the presentation of the 4 panels, a brief presentation, I promise, the aim of this conference is to identify and analyze the political, which are also cultural and social links connecting Southern Europe to Latin America in the 20th century. We will be paying special attention to informal transnational agency and on regions and nation states traditionally considered as peripheral, and we will thus address some key issues that have been neglected by global history. So this conference has 4 sessions, 4 panels, regrouping presentations which all share a common questioning relevant to our topic. In the first panel, all 3 presentations provide a comprehensive survey of the literature on issues related with transnational history, identifying new trends and blind spots. Through an interdisciplinary approach, drawing from both history and political science, Eduardo Rey and Alberto Martin will invite us to reflect upon the conceptual framework of transnational history, more precisely the concept of waves. Both Rey and Martin and Maud Giriot will address another crucial issue in transnational history and in any historiography really, that of the temporal and spatial scales pertinent for their object of study. Rey and Martin will show that in order to fully grasp the 1960s, 1970s revolutionary left's political circulations, we need to insert them in a larger chronological scope, which includes colonial experiences and anti-colonial wars. The centrality of the colonial question will also be posed and presented by Jeremy Rubinstein in the 3rd session, but Rubinstein will be focusing on the military far right. Maud Giriot will also advocate for a longue durée analysis of the Cold War military Brazilian military, but also for a more complex approach to the geography of political circulations, including the United States, but also colonial powers and South-South circulations. As for Claudio Rolle, he will also focus on the issue of interdisciplinarity, suggesting a groundbreaking approach to cultural transfers of contestation. For Rolle, revolutionary songs and more generally politically committed mass culture would not solely be analyzed as an object that circulates through pre-existing networks, but as an actor of political circulations which fabricates a new language, what Rolle calls a new auditory internationalism, thus creating the conditions of possibility for the circulation of political ideas and agency. Alessandro Guida and Valerio Giannadasio will also be exploring the role and central importance of mass media and cultural artifacts. The 2nd and 3rd sessions or panels share several central themes and questions explored through different case studies of political circulations between Southern Europe and Latin America, mostly during the 60s and the 70s. The issue of temporality and of the most pertinent chronology for transnational history will also be addressed here through the presentations of Marcelo Casals, who will advocate for the need to insert the Chilean left's Cold War history into a longue durée approach in order to explain its rapid introduction in European networks after the 1973 coup d'etat. Carlos Herrera, who inserts the 1980s French socialism into a larger chronology which traces back to the 60s or even the 30s. Gerardo Leibner and Jeremy Rubinstein, who will demonstrate how the transatlantic circulations of communist and armed left in the case of Leibner and the military right in the case of Rubinstein cannot be explained without the theoretical references to the European 40s, Nazism and the resistance, but also the 40s and 50s anti-colonial wars and transnational networks built at that time. The second crucial issue here is the role of Latin America and Southern Europe as producers or receivers of ideas and transnational agency. Alfredo Riquelme, whose paper focuses on the decisive impact of popular unity and the Chilean exile on the 70s European left, also points out exiles and diasporas as a crucial actor of circulations, an important conclusion that also reaches Giannattasio in his paper. Latin American politics as a defining experience not only for Latin America but also for Europe is a hypothesis that will outline Carlos Herrera, Gerardo Leibner, and Marcelo Casals. What is more, the papers, they all demonstrate the constant circulation of ideas and agency between Europe and Latin America, thus creating a transatlantic political space which leads us to the question of the continental or regional characterization of specific historical events, such as the resistance to the Nazis, the European colonial wars, or the Chilean coup d'etat. To put it another way, what we can call global or even better transnational events. So several papers also remind us the relevance in the circulatory process not only of a formalized and coherent set of ideas, but also of emotions in order to achieve a more complex approach to political rationale, which is not limited only to rational choice. The full panel aims to do just that, explore the plurality and diversity of what we should consider as political, amplifying our exploration of what political is in order to take into account also its anthropological and even biological dimensions. Benedetta Calandra unfortunately could not be with us today for health reasons, but I would really like to mention here her fascinating paper focused on the issue of population control and transnational debates about forced sterilization and the subsequent building of a transnational public space through the case study of Puerto Rico. Calandra was posing the problem of modernity and modernization as key factors in the transnationalization of politics. Valerio Giannattasio will focus on the porosity of categories and the transnationalization of politics through the seemingly contradictory case of fascism. Giannattasio will show that nationalism is not a less transnational ideology through the study of transatlantic propaganda of the Italian fascist state, also reminding us the key role of nation states and of migration and diasporas in transnational history. Giannattasio will invite us to explore a variety of media through which circulations take place and different types of agency in transnational history, but what is also very interesting in his paper is his analysis not only of the successful circulations but also of the constraints and impediments to circulations. The key role of nation states and that of experts and private agencies is highlighted by Alessandro Guida, who will propose a fascinating exploration of the Chilean junta's international propaganda and the global war on image in the Cold War context, focusing on different kinds of population control, the control over the minds rather than over the bodies that would have been explored by Calandra. Without further delay, I hand it over to the next speakers, en vous souhaitant un très beau colloque. Merci beaucoup.